Senator from Oklahoma.
The United States is always grateful to be able to receive heads of state from around the world. Heads of state from around the world come to the United States because they know we're 25% of the world's economy. We're the most powerful military in the world. We're the most moral nation in the world, and how we try to be able to manage freedom of the press, freedom of the speech, freedom of opportunity for all people within our country. And when we see a problem in our country, we work to be able to address that. So with that, we're welcoming another head of state to the United States today, President Erdogan of Turkey. Turkey's been a long-standing NATO ally. NATO was formed in the late 1940s. Turkey and Greece were the first two countries that came into NATO after its formation in the 1940s, so Turkey's been a member of NATO since 1952. We have a very important military base based in Turkey, Incirlik Air Force Base. It's key in the war against terror in that entire region. Turkey hosts the largest Syrian refugee population. Turkey has been very engaged in NATO, filling all of its billets, all of its requirements. They have worked to be able to be a good partner. They have partnered with us in not only the war on terror in multiple different countries and regions, but they've been very faithful to engage with NATO as a whole. But something is happening in Turkey that I hope President Trump and President Erdogan had a very frank discussion on. Because since 2016, President Erdogan of Turkey is shifting Turkey away from NATO towards Russia, towards a more authoritarian regime, changing their constitution to give more power to Erdogan and to whoever his successor is, if there's a successor to Erdogan, if he doesn't just maintain power and keep it forever from here on out. There was a mayoral election in Istanbul that President Erdogan didn't agree with, and so he just declared it null and void and forced another election in Istanbul, hoping to get the outlook that he wanted. But the Turkish people actually voted even more so against Erdogan in the next election in Istanbul, putting in someone who's directly opposed to Erdogan and his party. President Erdogan recently imprisoned an American pastor who had served more than 20 years in Turkey, serving all people of all faiths and all backgrounds in the beautiful city of Izmir. He rounded up Andrew Brunson with tens of thousands of other people that President Erdogan and his government just considered a threat. Most of them they held without charges for years now. There are still thousands of people right now that are still awaiting their day in court from the 2016 coup, not knowing if any of these folks were actually connected to the coup. They rounded up teachers, journalists, law enforcement individuals, just everyone that they could round up that they had any suspicion of, imprisoned them and said, we'll bring charges to you later. And many of those, thousands of them, are still waiting for later. I happened to be in Turkey in December of 2016 to personally meet with the Ministry of Justice in Ankara to talk about Andrew Brunson, an American that had been swept up in that time period, who had nothing to do with the coup that happened in 2016. We had President Erdogan solely had the ability to be able to get him released, but held him for years with all kinds of wild accusations against a missionary American who had been there for decades. Turkey continues to be able to focus on the Kurdish Syrians just south of their border. Now, I have to tell you, there are a group of the Kurds that I understand President Erdogan should be attentive to. There's a certain group called the PKK that the United States also considers that Kurdish group terrorists and have for decades. That particular group of Kurds that are in Syria have traveled into Turkey and carried out car bombs, have killed hundreds of people in terrorist attack in Turkey. So President Erdogan has every reason to be able to pay attention to that particular group of Kurds. And I understand his frustration that the United States partnered with them to take out ISIS. But the fact was, Turkey would not come help us across the border take out ISIS. And so we found partners that would take on ISIS with us. And they did. And now Erdogan wants to be able to push those folks back. His methods are quite brutal in the process. When we went into Afghanistan, we understood that all Afghan people were not our enemy. The Taliban were, Al-Qaeda were, That was our enemy. And they had found their way among the population. So we were exceptionally careful when we went into Afghanistan to protect the Afghan people, yet find ways to be able to take the battle to the Taliban and to al-Qaeda. Erdogan's methods: come across the border with tanks and heavy artillery and start shelling cities in Syria, knowing there were some PKK in those villages, and so they just shelled them all. Erdogan also, in some of his thugs that came across in some of the other groups that were working with the Turks, we also have footage of them taking prisoners and shooting them beside the road and leaving their body there. People that had surrendered, people that had already been handcuffed, executing them beside the road. That's a war crime that we should follow up with, and I hope President Trump had a very frank conversation with President Erdogan about following up on war crimes. And just to add to all of our difficulties right now with President Erdogan, in the past couple of years, he has shifted his attention towards Russia and has now completed a purchase of Russian air defense system, the very first and only NATO country ever to purchase Russian military equipment that's not interoperable with the rest of NATO, Russian equipment that is specifically designed to be able to take the fight to the F-35. And Turkey believes that it's going to purchase the F-35 from the United States, and also they believe they can purchase the S-400 from Russia and have them side by side. Well, they are wrong. Years ago, Congress passed the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, commonly known as CAATSA. It was a very clear message to anyone who buys Russian military equipment that there are sanctions coming to your country. And it's clear. And we have applied those sanctions in the past, and those sanctions need to be applied to Turkey now. In addition to that, Senator Shaheen and I have partnered together to be able to put a bill to be able to block Turkey from taking any of the F-35s. Not trained in the equipment, not simulators, no F-35s can go to Turkey. If they're interested in buying Russian air defense systems, they understand clearly what that means, because we have made it clear to the Turks for 2 years now. If you buy Russian equipment, you cannot also have the F-35. President Erdogan was aware of that, his administration was aware of that, and I hope President Trump made it clear to him today. As clear as this Congress has made it clear in a bipartisan basis that Turkey cannot have the F-35 and also have Russian military equipment at the same time. That's incompatible. And we will continue to make that very clear in the days ahead in our legislation, and I believe the vote will not even be close to be able to send a message to Turkey that we are interested in maintaining our friendship and our NATO ally. But our NATO ally needs to make a decision if they are a NATO ally or if they are a Russian ally, because those two are not congruent. I hope that was the conversation that happened today. We'll find out in the days ahead. But even if it was not, I hope that President Erdogan and the Turkish embassy hears it clearly now. This Congress would look forward to partnering with Turkey again in the future, as we have for decades in the past. We've had an economic relationship, a military relationship, a genuine friendship with Turkey. But we do not know who Turkey is anymore. We don't recognize the Turkey of today from Turkey 5 years ago. We would never come to your country and beat up protesters in the street as President Erdogan's security thugs did last year in the United States. We would never do that to your country. We would never counter NATO just to spite you. And we would certainly stay aligned with a friend who's been a friend for decades. To the Turkish people, our beef is not with you. Our frustration is with the regime that is currently directing your country away from its traditional allies. And we continue to reach our hand out to the Turkish people, and we continue to say to President Erdogan, this can be different in the days ahead, as it has been in the past. But some things need to change, and we are not the ones that walked away. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.